welcome to Command Point once again. Shane here, and yes, we're going to be talking about the worst faction in Kill Team, or at least what's considered to be the worst faction in Kill Team by the community at this point in the game's life cycle. Yeah, if you haven't figured it out already, we're talking about Craftworld. But why are they bad? Are they even bad? What makes a team bad anyway? For starters, let's contextualize what it means to be the quote-unquote worst faction in the whole game. Last edition, teams like Kroot and Elucidian Starstriders were the bottom dwellers. They were utterly useless in a competitive setting for the most part, and it was practically impossible to do genuinely well with them in a real, decent-sized tournament. They were the bottom of the barrel, the definition of F tier. In this edition, Craftworld are one of the only teams considered to be F tier, but that doesn't mean that they perform similarly to Kroot and Starstriders in the last edition of Kill Team. In fact, I would wager that every team this edition is leagues above where those two teams were, including Craftworld. Maybe that means this edition just doesn't have an F tier. Or we need to recontextualize what it means to have that kind of label. Last edition, you could have put several empty tiers of dirt and garbage between the two teams I mentioned and the rest of the factions. This edition, the differences between tiers are just that. An F tier team isn't much worse than a D tier team really, and can easily compete with teams higher on the communal rankings, which, by the way, are all subjective at the end of the day. It's just community perception, so don't get too bent out of shape if a content creator thinks your favorite team is trash. Take it as an opportunity to prove them wrong. I, for one, would love to see someone win a tournament with Craftworld, and while I think it's probably very difficult, I don't think it's impossible by any means. Anyway, let's talk about the faction itself. This isn't going to be a full deep dive or anything, we'll do one of those later down the line, but I want to talk a little bit about what the faction actually has going for it before I go into why I think they're probably the bottom of the pack. In a lot of ways, Craftworld has many of the tools that a faction needs to be high tier, weirdly enough. There are teams ranked above them that, in my opinion, are severely held back by the absence of many tools that Craftworld have access to. And the presence of these tools kind of links to the whole thesis I came up with for this video, that Craftworld and Kill Team are the inverse of Chaos Demons. You might be thinking, what on earth do those two teams have to do with each other? Well, from a gameplay perspective, almost nothing, and that's why I find the comparison so interesting. These two teams are wildly different from one another on very fundamental levels, and I think understanding their differences can tell you a lot about what makes a faction good and what makes a faction bad. Craftworld, unlike Demons, have lots of tricks up their sleeves. They have access to excellent grenades, they can boost a model's APL at a crucial time, and they have access to a free dash through ploys on every model, unlike Demons who can only get that from Demonettes. Those three things may not seem like a lot, but they are almost necessary for a team to be really, really good. The lack of a consistently strong grenade even holds teams like Talons of the Emperor back, who are otherwise extremely strong. So, what makes Demons better than Craftworld? The models and the fire teams themselves. Demons are completely 100% honest. What you see is almost always what you get. Really strong models on a fire team that provides lots of bodies. You're very rarely going to get gotcha'd by Demons. They don't have a lot of crazy tricks up their sleeves, they're just solid, all around. They hit hard, they could take a decent amount of punishment, and there's a bunch of them. They don't have access to crazy equipment, they aren't extremely fast, they can't get an extra APL, but they'll give you a lot of trouble. They're just a straightforward, strong team. Craftworld, on the other hand, despite being really crafty, see what I did there? Are extremely lacking when it comes to having actual good models and actual good fire teams. Dire Avengers are alright, but there's only 4 of them. Avenger Shuriken catapults can hurt, sure, but do they hurt enough to make up for the fact that you have less bodies than a Scion fire team that could take special weapons despite having the same number of wounds and the same save characteristic? Most people would probably agree that they don't. The fire teams don't have enough bodies, the models just aren't quite strong enough, but that's only half the problem. For a team that doesn't have 12 to 14 bodies, they're extremely lacking in a real melee threat. Look at the other primarily shooty teams like Vetguard or Pathfinders. They have quite a few more bodies, on top of being even more tricky than Craftworld due to the fact that they're bespoke teams. Sure, you have Storm Guardians, but the melee profiles just don't hit hard enough against anything with more than 7 wounds. And the Dire Avenger Exarch is nice in melee, but it's your leader and it's only one model. And no, the panoply equipment isn't good enough to make up for this at all. But because Craftworld have those extremely necessary tools that I mentioned before, the types of changes to make them more competitive would be extremely easy to implement. Maybe another body or two in the kill team would go a long way. This is very much the skeleton of a very good team, it's just lacking a bit of muscle. So what's the big takeaway here? I think even though the ceiling may be capped, this comparison tells me that it's better right now to have a faction with really good chassis and fire teams than a faction with a lot of tricks up their sleeve that have weak bodies and lacking fire teams. But where the skill ceiling for a team like Chaos Demons might be a bit capped, the skill ceiling for Craftworld, on the other hand, is extremely high. They're a really interesting team, weak or not. The tools they have access to are explicitly good at rewarding good players. Yeah, they might be the weakest of the bunch at this moment, but they can be rewarding and fun to play, and it wouldn't take a lot of change to make this team significantly stronger. So, I hope you enjoyed this chat. If you've just stumbled upon us, consider subscribing and hitting the bell for more videos. Thanks again to all of our followers over on Patreon that help keep this channel going. You guys are the best, and as always, have a good one.